Did you know that before the Tower of Babel, humanity spoke only one universal language? My name is Gercio Alfredo, and this is the Narrativas Bíblicas channel. And today we're going to uncover the secret of the language that existed before Babel and the 50 languages that emerged after the tower was built. This discovery will surprise you. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support our work, you can join our members club starting at just $1.99 and gain access to exclusive biblical studies and extra content. Imagine a world without language barriers. A world where every thought, every idea, every story could be shared and understood by all. No need for translators, no risk of miscommunication. This isn't a futuristic fantasy. According to the Bible, it was humanity's original reality. In the early days after the Great Flood, a single human family began to repopulate the earth, and they did so with a single voice. This chapter sets the stage for one of the most dramatic and consequential events in human history, the building of the Tower of Babel. We will read the foundational text, pose the critical questions that have puzzled theologians and linguists for centuries, and begin our journey to understand what was lost and what was gained in the land of Shinar. Our investigation begins in the book of Genesis, chapter 11. The stage is set with a stark and powerful declaration. Now the whole earth had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone, and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of all the earth. This short passage, just 9 verses, is packed with mystery and profound implications. It forces us to ask a series of fundamental questions that will guide our entire investigation. First, what was this original, universal language? Did it have a name? Does any trace of it survive today? Second, what was the true sin of Babel? Was it merely pride and ambition in building a tall tower? Or was there a deeper, more defiant rebellion against God's divine plan for humanity? Third, how did God confuse their language? Was it a sudden, miraculous event that instantly created dozens of fully formed, distinct languages? Or did it trigger a natural process of linguistic divergence? And finally, can we identify the languages that emerged from this event? The prompt for our video mentions 50 languages. Where does this number come from? And can we trace the lineage of modern peoples back to this moment of dispersion? These are the questions we will explore, chapter by chapter, blending biblical narrative, theological interpretation, and linguistic science to piece together this incredible story. The story of the Tower of Babel is not just a theological tale. It is rooted in a specific time and place. The plain in Shinar is a direct reference to Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization located in modern-day Iraq. This was the land of the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians, cultures famous for their monumental architecture. The tower mentioned in Genesis is almost universally identified by scholars as a ziggurat. These were massive stepped pyramids built not as tombs like in Egypt, but as temple complexes. Their purpose was to serve as a bridge between the heavens and the earth, a man-made mountain to invite the gods down to the human realm. The name of the great ziggurat of Babylon itself was Etemenanki, which means Temple of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. The biblical author's description of using brick instead of stone and tar for mortar is a remarkably accurate detail of Mesopotamian construction techniques, as stone was scarce in the river plains. The story's power has captivated the human imagination for millennia, inspiring some of the most iconic works of art in history. Peter Bruegel, the elder's masterpiece, The Tower of Babel, is perhaps the most famous. He doesn't just paint a building, he paints an idea. The tower, inspired by the Roman Colosseum, is a monument to human hubris. It is simultaneously magnificent and doomed, a chaotic swirl of activity that is already beginning to crumble under its own weight. Bruegel captures the essence of the story, the grand ambition and the inevitable failure. These artistic interpretations show us that every generation has seen its own reflection in the story of Babel, its own ambitions, its own empires, and its own anxieties about reaching too high. Before we move on, it's important to consider the first spiritual lesson from this story. The world before Babel had unity, one people, one language. This sounds like an ideal state, a paradise of perfect communication. But the story immediately complicates this idea. Their unity was leveraged for a purpose that displeased God. They sought to make a name for themselves and to defy God's command to fill the earth. Genesis 9:1. This introduces a critical distinction that will be a theme throughout our study: the difference between unity and uniformity. The people of Babel sought uniformity, a single location, a single project, a single identity centered on their own achievement. They wanted to consolidate power. God's plan, however, seems to have always been for a dynamic unity expressed through diversity. Different peoples, cultures, and eventually languages, all reflecting different facets of their Creator while filling the whole earth. Their project was an attempt to reverse the divine mandate of diversification. As we begin this journey, we must hold this tension in our minds. Is diversity a curse, a punishment for sin? Or was the curse actually a severe mercy, a course correction to push humanity back onto the path of God's intended, beautiful, and diverse plan? Here is our first moment of reflection. Before we uncover the secrets of the languages, I want to ask you, have you ever thought of linguistic and cultural diversity as a punishment from God or as a gift? Let us know your initial thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is a valuable part of this shared exploration. In our next chapter, we will step back in time, before the first brick of the tower was ever laid. We will explore the world as described in Genesis 10, the Table of Nations, to understand the cultural and geographic landscape from which the builders of Babel emerged. To understand the rebellion at Babel, we must first understand the world God intended to create. Before the 9 verses of Genesis 11, there is a chapter that is often overlooked by modern readers, Genesis 10, known as the Table of Nations. It is a unique and fascinating document. It's not just a dry genealogy, it's a theological map of the post-flood world, outlining the descendants of Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. This chapter provides the crucial context for Babel. It shows God's plan for humanity to spread out and form distinct clans, territories, and nations, each with its own identity. It is the story of diversification that the builders of Babel tried to halt. Let's read a key summary verse from this chapter, which strangely seems to contradict the one-language statement in Genesis 11. From these the maritime peoples spread out into their territories by their clans within their nations, each with its own language. Each with its own language. How can this be, if Genesis 11:1 says, "The whole earth had one language"? This apparent contradiction is a clue. Many scholars believe Genesis 10 describes the world after the Babel event, providing the results of the scattering, while Genesis 11 provides a flashback to explain how that scattering happened. It's a common literary technique in ancient texts, where the outcome is presented before the cause. With this framework, Genesis 10 becomes our blueprint for the 50 languages we will later investigate. After the flood, all of humanity descended from Noah's 3 sons. The Table of Nations organizes the known world into 3 great branches, each associated with a different son. First, there is Japheth. Genesis 10:2-5 lists his descendants, including Gomer, Magog, Javan, and Tubal. Traditionally, these peoples are associated with the nations to the north and west of Israel, spreading across Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, the Aegean Islands, and into Europe. The text itself calls them the maritime peoples. From Javan, for example, we get the name Ionia, an ancient Greek region. These are the ancestors of many Indo-European peoples. Second, there is Ham. His descendants, listed in Genesis 10:6-20, include Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. These names are strongly associated with Africa and the southern Levant. Cush is an ancient name for the region south of Egypt, Nubia, Ethiopia. Mizraim is the Hebrew word for Egypt itself. Put is often identified with Libya, and Canaan refers to the inhabitants of the land that would later become Israel. This branch of humanity spread south and southwest. However, the line of Ham also contains a pivotal and notorious figure, Nimrod. The text says of him, Genesis 10:8-10, Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh in Shinar. Notice the location. Shinar, the very place where the Tower of Babel was built. Jewish and Christian tradition often identifies Nimrod as the defiant king who commissioned the tower, a mighty hunter before the Lord, which can be interpreted as in defiance of the Lord. He represents the first post-flood attempt at empire building and centralized power, the very ideology behind the tower. Finally, there is Shem, from whom we get the word Semitic. His descendants, listed in Genesis 10:21-31, include Elam, Asher, and Eber, from whom the name Hebrew is derived. Abraham, the father of the Israelite nation, is a descendant of Shem. These peoples are primarily associated with Mesopotamia and the Arabian Peninsula, forming the Semitic-speaking peoples like the Akkadians, Assyrians, Arameans, and Arabs. The Table of Nations is not just a list of names. It's an ancient ethnography, linking biblical figures to real-world peoples and places known to the ancient Israelites. Let's look at a few clear examples. Javan, son of Japheth, the Hebrew name for Greece. Mizraim, son of Ham, the Hebrew Arabic name for Egypt, Miser. Ashur, son of Shem, ancestor of the Assyrians. Canaan, son of Ham, his descendants the Canaanites encountered by Israel. What is the practical takeaway from this ancient list of names? It reveals something profound about the character of God. Before the story of rebellion, the Bible presents a vision of a world teeming with variety. God doesn't just create one type of bird or one type of tree. His creation is a symphony of diversity. Genesis 10 suggests the same is true for humanity. Theological. The divine plan was not for a monolithic, homogeneous human race. It was for a family of families, a nation of nations, each with its unique territory, clan structure, and, as the text explicitly states, language. The scattering was not originally a punishment, but a blessing. It was the fulfillment of the command to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Genesis 1:28. The project at Babel was therefore a direct contradiction of this creative and expansive impulse. This understanding completely reframes the story that follows. The confusion of languages is not God introducing something new and strange, but rather God forcefully restoring his original design in the face of human resistance. Here is our reflection for this chapter. Genesis 10 lists many peoples, some of whom became enemies of Israel. Yet the chapter presents them all as part of the same human family under God's providence. How does this change the way we view people from different nations or cultures, especially those we might consider rivals or outsiders? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now that we understand the world as it was meant to be, we are ready to descend into the plain of Shinar and analyze, verse by verse, the story of the tower that challenged heaven itself. We now arrive at the heart of the drama. The people have migrated to the plain of Shinar. They have a single language, a unified purpose, and a new technology, baked bricks. With these, they embark on a project that will echo through eternity. But what was truly driving them? In this chapter, we will dissect the Genesis 11 narrative verse by verse, exploring the multiple layers of their sin. It was more than just architecture. It was a theological statement. It was a project born of fear, fueled by pride, and aimed at defying the very command of God. Let's reread the central verses that reveal their motivation. Genesis 11:3-4. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." Let's break down the builders' declaration. It reveals a threefold motivation for their rebellion. 1. Let us build ourselves a city, with a tower that reaches to the heavens. This is not just about height. As we learned, the tower was a ziggurat, a sacred structure. The phrase "reaches to the heavens" was a common Mesopotamian idiom for temple construction, signifying a connection to the divine realm. However, some scholars, like John H. Walton, argue that the purpose of a ziggurat was not for humans to ascend to God, but for the God to descend to them. In this view, the people were building a system to control and manipulate divine presence, to make God beholden to them on their own terms. They were creating a religion centered on human works, trying to domesticate God. 2. So that we may make a name for ourselves. This is the cry of human pride. Instead of living under the name of God, they wanted to create their own legacy, their own fame, their own glory. In the Bible, a name represents authority, character, and reputation. By seeking to make their own name, they were rejecting God's authority over them. It was a declaration of self-sufficiency and autonomy. They wanted to be the masters of their own destiny, remembered for their own great works, not as creatures dependent on a creator. This is the root of idolatry, replacing the glory of God with the glory of man. 3. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. Here is the most direct act of defiance. This statement reveals their motivation was rooted in fear and a direct rejection of God's primary command to post-flood humanity. In Genesis 9:1, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth." The builders of Babel heard this command and chose to do the exact opposite. They feared being scattered. They clung to their man-made security and uniformity, refusing to embrace the expansive, diverse future God had planned for them. Their city was a fortress against God's will. Then comes the divine response. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. Genesis 11:5. This is a beautiful piece of biblical irony. The people build a tower to reach the heavens, but it is so insignificant from God's perspective that he has to come down just to get a good look at it. It emphasizes the futility of their efforts. And God's assessment is chilling. If as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. By Genesis 11:6. This is not a statement of fear but of diagnosis. God sees that unchecked, unified human ambition, when directed against his will, has a limitless capacity for evil and self-destruction. The intervention is an act of mercy, not just judgment. It prevents humanity from achieving a totalitarian unity that would have crushed the human spirit. The story of Babel is the archetype for a recurring sin throughout the Bible, the sin of arrogant, oppressive empire. Think of Pharaoh's Egypt. He enslaves the Israelites and forces them to build his store cities, Exodus 1:11, using them as human bricks for his own glory. His ambition is to build a great name for himself, and he does so through oppression. God's response is to liberate the people and scatter Pharaoh's army in the sea. Think of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, the very same location as Babel. In the book of Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar stands on his palace roof and declares, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Daniel 4:30. His pride is a direct echo of the Babel builders. God's response is immediate. He humbles the king, who loses his sanity and lives like an animal until he acknowledges that the Most High is sovereign. Even the Roman Empire of the New Testament, with its enforced peace, the Pax Romana, and its demand for emperor worship, reflects this Babel-like tendency to create a man-made unity under a single deified authority. In each case, the pattern is the same. Humanity centralizes power, seeks its own glory, and creates a system of uniformity and oppression. And in each case, God acts to deconstruct, to scatter, and to humble. The sin of Babel is not confined to ancient history. The desire to make a name for ourselves is a deeply human temptation. We build towers in our own lives every day. Our career can become a tower, built for our own reputation rather than to serve others. Our social media presence can be a tower, carefully constructed to project an image of success and happiness. Even our religious activities, as one scholar notes, can become towers. How many of our great endeavors in the church, our programs, our building projects, are focused on our glory and success rather than God's? The story of Babel calls us to examine our motivations. Are we building for God's glory or our own? Are we using the unity we have with others to serve God's expansive purposes, or to build our own little kingdom of safety and control? It's a call to humility, to recognize that our true identity is found not in the name we make for ourselves, but in the name God has given us as His children. Let's pause for a moment of reflection. What tower might you be tempted to build in your own life? It could be in your career, your family, or even your personal ambitions. Take a moment to consider this, and if you feel comfortable, share a general thought in the comments. Recognizing our own Babel is the first step toward humility. With the stage set and the motivations clear, we are now ready to tackle one of the most fascinating questions of all: how are languages born? In the next chapter, we will take a brief detour into the world of linguistics to understand the science of language, before returning to see how it intersects with the biblical narrative. Genesis 11 presents the origin of languages as a singular divine act of confusion. For millennia, this was the primary explanation for the world's linguistic diversity. But in the last 2 centuries, a new field of science has emerged to tackle this same question: historical linguistics. How do scientists explain the existence of over 7,000 languages on Earth today? In this chapter, we will take a brief but essential journey into the world of linguistics. We'll explore the concept of language families, the methods used to reconstruct ancient tongues, and the natural processes of language change. Our goal is not to pit science against the Bible, but to understand both perspectives, so we can see where they might conflict and where they might surprisingly align. A key verse from our story frames this discussion perfectly. Genesis 11:7. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. The result was a loss of mutual intelligibility. This is the very definition of what separates one language from another. But how does this happen in the natural world? Scientific. From a scientific perspective, languages are not created instantly. They evolve, much like biological species. The primary model for understanding this is the genealogical classification, or the concept of language families. A language family is a group of languages that all descend